Welcome, everyone. My name's Clay Wirestone. I'm the opinion editor at Kansas Reflector, and I am joined by Sherman Smith, our editor-in-chief. Hello, Sherman.
Hello, Clay.
Now, Sherman, do you want to explain to our viewers why you are in a separate window on our screen instead of next to me today?
Yeah, as we reported this past week, Douglas County has one of the highest concentrations of illness anywhere in the country, it seems, and I am not immune to that. So it was a rough week for me working from home, trying to fight through a bad cold or something like that. I tested negative for all the bad stuff, but uh, that's why it's not safe for the two of us to be in the same place at the same time just yet.
Well, that and of course all of the raw charisma. Uh, Also, it is the giant winter storm has been blowing through today, so we'll see if that lives up to expectations. Although I guess the snowfall has been totals have been reduced that they expect. So let's just look back. Let's look back at this last week at in the Kansas legislature. What were you tracking, Sherman, from your sick bed, as it were?
I tuned into the House Elections Committee Tuesday and Thursday when they met to track what they were up to. And the elections chair there, Pat Proctor, a representative from Leavenworth, Republican, running for Secretary of State, I think we can safely say that this is an effective platform for him in running for statewide office. He's floating a number of election related bills. The ones that I covered last week were primarily dealing with moving elections to even numbered years. So all the local elections from dog catcher to school board, the mayor's race, city council, county commission. He wants all of those to appear alongside either the presidential race and congressional races or the governor's race and all the other statewide races. Only have elections in even numbered years. That's the idea. He says this is all about increasing voter turnouts because those local elections tend to have 10 to 20% turnout instead of the 60% that other races would have. The critics of this say it's going to be very cumbersome both for local election officials and for voters to go through all of this on one ballot. They also point out that most of the time Pat Proctor is proposing laws that would actually make it more difficult to vote, so it seems disingenuous to say that this is about voter turnout.
Well, and not just proposing laws that have would limit voter turnout, but actually getting such laws passed. I mean, getting such bills actually passed into law.
Well,
Um,
and also they passed in his committee this week a law that kind of flies under the radar. I just made a brief mention of it in my story, one of my stories, but they're going to ban or trying to restrict third-party websites from processing voter registrations. You don't have to go back too far to remember when Chris Kobach was the Secretary of State. The state website was notoriously clunky, and they were refusing to process certain types of voter registration forms if you weren't going to provide your birth certificate, for instance. And so there was another site that popped up called ksvotes.org. This was able to get thousands of people registered to vote very easily, seamlessly, and using the federal forms so that you didn't have to worry about some of the kind of onerous rules that Kobach wanted. And so, those rules are no longer in effect, but this is a way of saying if we ever put draconian rules like that back into place, you can't run an end around with your own website.
well, the other thing that is of note with the that House Elections Committee, and I wrote a column about this, is if you look at kind of the total of the bills that are being proposed by Proctor and other folks closely connected to the Republican side of that committee, there's really the way they work together would be to quite possibly really expand Republican control on a lot of these local elections. If you think about having a giant ballot that people get in the even numbered years, even the Secretary of State's office, Scott Schwab, kind of suggested this would be a possibility that people would lose kind of interest and focus as they go down the ballot. And so either they don't vote or perhaps they just vote for one party that they know that they like. But then the other bill that's being proposed, and I don't think it's had a hearing yet, would actually allow candidates in nonpartisan races, which, that's because they're at the local level and supposedly they're about everybody working together. But folks running in these nonpartisan elections would be allowed to add their uh, party registration next to their name, which would really have the ultimate effect of making everything much more partisan.
Yeah, Rick Pifo, the Harvey County clerk, made this point as well that, you know, you may only have 10 to 20% turnout in a local election, but those are people who are highly motivated to have a voice in that local election. They know what's going on, they understand those local issues, and they're making an informed decision. If you, you know, it's not, no question you would have greater turnouts in those races in the sense that more people would be voting for them in a presidential cycle or a governor cycle. But there is a question of once you get so far down that ballot to the third or fourth or fifth page, do you actually know who any of these people are that you're voting for?
Now, also looking at this last week, Sherman obviously talked about the Chiefs' potential move across state lines from Missouri to Kansas. A giant story, continues to be a giant story, and there was some legislative discussion about that. So, what happened there?
You know, I think so many people have a lot of unanswered questions or just some heartburn about this deal. Uh, you know, we are going to be spending billions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, to bring this stadium into Kansas. What the legislature did, these committees brought in Corb Maxwell, an attorney working for the Kansas City Chiefs, to answer whatever questions they had and try to ease their concerns. I'm not sure how effective he was in doing that. There's this unanswered question, really, that somebody actually asked in one of these hearings, which is just why do we think this will be the first taxpayer funded stadium deal that ever pays off? And I think the assurance that we're getting from the chief's attorney is that not only will this pay off, but it'll pay off 10 to 15 years sooner than the 30-year term that they're expecting. They're that confident in how successful this deal is going to be that the Chiefs can generate so much new revenue in Kansas that it'll pay off these bonds early. Of course, it's worth pointing out that the people who are selling this deal right now are not going to be around 20 years from now to have to answer for it.
Well, and I think it's important to note that even though Governor Laura Kelly and legislative leaders were out celebrating this deal in December, um, the I don't want to say it's backlash exactly, but certainly many people in Kansas and people in positions of power in Kansas have really, while not tapping the brakes exactly, as you say, there's been real heartburn, and I think we can't kind of overstate enough the extent to which, everyone celebrated at the start, but there really are serious questions about how this is going to work.
But I think at the heart of it too is just the sort of populism, the idea that maybe it's we shouldn't be giving billions of dollars to a family that are already billionaires to begin with that could afford their own stadium. Um, Across the country, what we see is the public hardly ever, if ever, when put to a vote, will support these kind of stadium deals. They only ever happen when elected officials can get the deal done without putting it to a public vote.
Now, shifting on, we are now starting the third week of the legislative session, and lots of stuff going on. Always lots of stuff going on. One of the biggest things is going to be we're going to start really digging in to the state budget.
Yeah, you know, Republican leaders have said they want to cut $200 million from the budget, 200 million annually from the state budget. It's not really clear where that money is going to come from just yet, although they've really put a target on higher education. On Monday in a House Appropriations Committee, they're actually going to debate or have testimony on their budget bill, and so that'll really give us a first, hard look at what is in this budget and what their plan may be. I think their idea is to uh, have a hearing on Monday and maybe within a week have this passed out of the chamber, out of the full House. So it looks like it's moving quickly. We'll get more details on that.
Well, and I attended a press availability on
Next.
Thursday with House Minority Leader Brandon Woodard, Senate Minority Leader Dinah Sykes, both Democrats, and they talked about the fact that the chambers at this point, the House is looking to pass out its budget, and the Senate is looking to pass out a separate budget. Last year, I believe the budget actually just started in the House and then went over to the Senate. So the idea that we're going to actually have perhaps two, kind of visions coming from the different chambers is going to be an interesting thing to watch. And I think House Speaker Dan Hawkins has been much more aggressive in terms of talking about cuts. Of course, he's not the one running for governor. Senate President Ty Masterson is the one running for governor. So it'll be interesting to see if the appetite for trims is the same in each chamber.
Yeah, I think both chambers always want to put their own kind of stamp on the budgets. They pass different versions each year, and then they have to get together with two Senate Republicans, one Senate Democrat, two House Republicans, one House Democrat. The six of them go into a room, and they don't come out until they've agreed on everything.
Couple of other things you're watching for this week three, Sherman. What else is on the agenda?
Yeah, kind of related to the budget, there are several hearings coming up in the Senate. COJ, it's their version of DOJ. It's the Committee on Government Efficiency. It just looks like they're really trying to crack down on who's getting food assistance in Kansas. They want to apply vigorous vetting rules to who's getting free and reduced meals at school. They want to look at who's getting food assistance elsewhere. Um, and I think the idea, as we've seen in the past, is the more complicated and onerous you can make the process for even applying and proving that you are eligible for this, the fewer people who will actually go through that process. I think one of the reasons we have such a high SNAP error rate, that's the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program that the federal government administers. It's like a 200-page application to begin with. You make one mistake throughout there, and it becomes an error. The end goal, of course, is even though Kansas already has one of the most restrictive sets of rules to get food anywhere in the country, we want to make it even harder for struggling families to get food. So that's coming up this week. We're going to have a lot more stuff happening in Pat Proctor's Elections Committee, having hearings on bills. And of course, we should say that these could all be rescheduled if the weather is really bad in parts of the state. But at the time of this taping, it looks like hearings on requiring a presidential preference primary every 4 years. Last year was kind of the first time in a long time, I think, that we had one of those. Um, they want to, I should say 2024, uh, they want to make it harder to deliver somebody's ballot for them. Proctor in the past has talked about this mythical ballot harvesting that he thinks is corrupting elections. It really is just that advocates or candidates sometimes will proactively say, if you have filled out your ballots but you don't have time to take it down to the election office, we will deliver it for you. He wants to really put an end to that, I think, is the goal of that bill. Also, looking at a constitutional amendment that would put the state's voter ID requirement when you show up at the poll, wants to put that in the state constitution. You can't vote unless you have a photo ID.
And
And of course, the other fun thing that we're looking at is on Tuesday, if plans don't change, there are going to be competing protests between an anti-abortion group called Abortion is Murder. They were allowed a protest permit to go inside the state house, but the state has refused the Satanic Grotto a permit to go inside the state house because they say their materials are too graphic and it could be violent. The Grotto has said, well, hold on a second. The anti abortion group has these graphic visuals that they bring with them, and the anti abortion movement has a long, long history of severe violence in this state. So the Satanists have prepared a 9-foot zombie Jesus that they plan to bring into the state house to protest the rules itself. And as we saw last March, these two groups could end up clashing. It's something we have to be cautious of, but we'll be looking at on Tuesday.
if anyone wants to follow along with this and learn what the Kansas Reflector is reporting each and every day, you can sign up for our newsletter. Just go to kansasreflector.com/subscribe. That's kansasreflector.com/subscribe, and you'll get a piping hot newsletter, as I like to say, every day in your email inbox at about 4 a.m. Okay, so now we're answering some questions or addressing some points for the Kansas City Call and editor Tracy Allen, who we're excited to be working with. The first of these is a question, kind of a comment about property taxes. Obviously, there's been a lot of concern about property taxes in various Kansas communities. Certainly in Wyandotte, the Wyandotte area, they have very high property taxes. The question that Tracy was asking was, what is the state doing to deal with the property tax challenge?
I think the short version is just talking a lot about it, as they did a year ago. The state actually doesn't have much, room to do anything about property tax. They can't directly provide relief. The state does have a 20 mil levy that it assesses to fund public schools, and if they reduce that, then they have to find that money somewhere else. So they've been reluctant to do that. Instead, their interest has been on just trying to tell local communities what to do. We do have legislation that is advanced. It would be a constitutional amendment. It advanced through the Senate Tax Committee last week, and it would put a cap on assessed property value increases from year to year. There would be some immediate tax relief because starting in 2027, they would roll back the clock to whatever the property was assessed at in 2022. So 5 year rollback, and then starting from there would only allow a 3% increase from year to year. Uh, County appraisers, or I should say, county governments, are not wild about this because they're saying, if we take the property tax away, we just have to make it up somewhere else.
Well, and that's the whole challenge with property taxes are that one of the reasons they are where they are in Kansas, and especially in some counties like Wyandotte, is that we've seen over the past, couple of decades just a continuing reduction in state support to municipalities and state
Yeah,
support to locals.
there was a decades old program that was, I think, defunded about 20 years ago that really offset local property taxes. The state would give money based on a formula to every county in the state to lower the local property tax burden. They actually eliminated that program entirely a couple of years ago, and it's not coming back anytime soon. There's another idea out there that received a hearing last week, and what it would do is whenever you sell your home, if it sells for not just homes, but businesses, commercial and industrial property as well, whenever you sell your property, if the sale price is less than the assessed value that the appraiser said it's worth, you would get a rebate for whatever excess tax you had paid for that year and the previous 4 years.
It's an ongoing issue where it's certainly not the last we're going to hear about this. It's in everyone's interest to be able to say that they're doing something about it, but we'll see.
Yes.
Secondly, um, noise at Kansas racetracks. Sherman, I guess we did have some coverage about this last week.
We did, and it's interesting. The biggest racetrack is at the Speedway up in Wyandotte County, but the people who showed up to really sell this bill in the legislature were the small mom and pop kind of drag race or drag strip kind of places around the state. What this is addressing though is uh, shielding those motorsports venues from liability if people have noise complaints. And it specifically applies to anybody who built a property near the racetrack after the racetrack was already there. There's a individual from this racetrack, this drag strip down in Mays near Wichita. It was built in 1963. Now they have, she said, a $2.7 million home built 500 feet away from the racetrack, and apparently is upset about the noise of the racetrack. So this is legislation moving through that would just say if you build your home near a racetrack, you can't complain about the noise there.
Indeed. And finally, Tracy asks if Kansas is considering trying to eliminate the state income tax, which is something that's also on the docket in Missouri. I can just say from what I know, it's certainly been something that Kansas has liked to talk about in the past, but in general, just the numbers don't add up.
I mean, this was at the heart of the failed Brownback tax experiment. They got rid of corporate income tax and lowered individual income taxes, and it bankrupted the state so dramatically that it uh, had to be mostly reversed in 2017, I think it was. So there's no talk of eliminating individual income tax. The state, of course, did eliminate a couple of years ago the upper income bracket for individual for individual income tax that more disproportionately benefited the people who make a lot of money, but did provide minimal tax relief to those who make, I think it was less than 75,000 or something.
Well, and circling back, all of this kind of fiddling with the income tax rates and, essentially tax cuts for the very richest Kansans is part of the reason why we're talking about spending cuts for future budgets. Like we
Yeah,
essentially created this issue here in Kansas by ourselves.
yeah. By trying to flatten those income tax brackets a couple of years ago, we're looking at flying off this fiscal cliff in terms of the state budget going in the red in like 3 years. So that's why they want to cut 200 million now.
Well, with that cheery thought, thanks so much to Tracy and the call for sending in those questions, those subjects, and we look forward to talking about those in the future as well. Thanks so much for talking, and again, subscribe to our newsletter. I'm Clay Wirestone. That was Sherman Smith.
Thank you, everybody.